We all know Richard Pryor from his acclaimed work in the cinema, but did you know that he had a career before Superman 3? In 1982, Richard Pryor was at a low. Ironically, the jokester had become the butt of jokes himself after a terrible near-death experience with drugs and fire. But Pryor turned it around and returned to the stage with his trademark foul-mouthed humor, some homespun wisdom, and finally with a frank story about the incident that everyone was talking about. Live on the Sunset Strip was a comeback, where the comedian opened his heart to the world, showed his vulnerability, and recaptured his audience. We love the great comedy albums of all time, so we thought we would test this one out. Join us, but be careful pouring that rum into your Pepsi and avoid all sources of open flame. It's time for episode 114 of Toasting the Classics, Richard Pryor live on the Sunset Strip. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, a podcast where we take something that people call classic and we drink something inspired by the classic. My name is Dave McArthur and I'm with
Dr. Clint Lanier.
We are doing something that is called a classic, and it was Clint's choice. What did you go with? This is free choice. You could have anything.
This was Richard Pryor's famous album, Live from the Sunset Strip.
Live on the Sunset
Live on
Strip.
the Sunset Strip, yeah. 1981, I believe.
I had 82. What is the Sunset Strip? Does that mean Sunset Boulevard? Like clubs
Yes.
along Sunset Boulevard in LA, right?
Yes. So I think
Okay.
that film,
I wanted to ask about there's the comedy album, right? Grammy-winning comedy album, but there's also a film. Is it just the film is just the film version of what's on the album, or are there two separate projects that are similar?
I believe it was.
I couldn't quite tell from what I was reading. It sounded like the same material.
It is the same material. I couldn't really tell either.
Listening to the album, I had the impression that he was playing for a live audience. Well, obviously, either way, he's playing for a live audience that can see him. So that's a stupid observation. But it seemed to me like there was something being missed that maybe his body motions and stuff would have added to it. So I had the feeling it's the same thing, just an audio version of what happened in the film. But the film has bad ratings. I don't know if you noticed that.
The film doesn't have very good ratings. Okay, I got 81 because it was done in
It
81.
was actually done. It was recorded.
Released in 82. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know. It's got like 40% or something like that on Rotten Tomatoes, which I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. What is
get.
that all about?
Yeah, I don't get because this is supposed to be like one of the top audio albums, like comedy audio albums of all time. So I don't know why I guess we'd have to go look at that separately. And I didn't really look into the film at all because we were doing the audio.
No, I didn't either. I didn't realize there was a film until I was kind of poking around doing some research and I realized, oh, okay, so there's a film version of this too. So, but that one doesn't seem to have the same level of acclaim, and I don't really know why that would probably it comes up in comparison more to Eddie Murphy's
Mhm.
work from the next couple of years after it. So maybe
A few years after
doesn't
that,
hold
yeah.
up in comparison. Those are things that I always meant to do on the show also because I've never seen any of Eddie Murphy's stand up. Like I just did not have access to that when I was a little kid at that time. Like I couldn't
Right.
watch things where people were cussing and
So the film was made at the Hollywood Palladium in 81. The audio album was recorded at the Circle Star Theater in San Carlos, California, and only one track was recorded at the Hollywood Palladium. So it's almost, if you think of it that way, it's almost an entirely different set. You know, you had a different crowd. You had
it sure sounds like it. So this must have just been, yeah, not two completely different projects, but two different projects because, yeah, Circle Star Theater, San Carlos, California,
right.
for tracks 1 through 4 and 6 through 7. Track 5 is at Hollywood Palladium.
Yeah, so only one was it, and that's where they filmed it. Though was the Hollywood Palladium from two different sets.
Okay.
So, I don't know. I guess we'd have to watch the film and kind of compare it. But
Yeah, I think you would because it sounds like it's kind of worth comparing because that picture of him on the theatrical poster for it,
yeah,
it's right here with him holding his foot. I feel like I've seen that a million times. I
yeah,
feel like that's
so
an image that's ingrained in my head, but
But it won a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Recording in 82.
uh-huh. Yep.
It's considered one of the best comedy albums of all time. So it's up there with like the Carlin and the Kinnison and the Lenny Bruce and a lot of the early, maybe not Bill Cosby so much, but at one time, you know, up there.
Well, Bill Cosby, I mean, just the work. Come on, you got to. I mean, he definitely was acclaimed for the work.
This is like one of the top comedy albums sort of all time. That's sort of the reasons I picked it. I was a big fan of Eddie Murphy, like you said. So Eddie Murphy Raw was a huge event. And he talks a lot in there about Richard Pryor and he talks about Bill Cosby, which is really kind of cool. So he like was able to integrate African American, the biggest African American comedians that came before him.
Right.
and sort of pit them against each other and stuff. So I just wanted to.
Well, it's kind of hard not to pit Bill Cosby and Richard Pryor, right? They're two completely different versions of, and yet when you're listening to Richard Pryor, I'm hearing Bill Cosby. I'm like, this is very similar to Bill Cosby. He's
Yeah,
got the voices, and he's constantly calling people Jack when he talks to them, and I'm
yeah,
like, oh, this sounds just like the Bill Cosby album that we listened to,
right.
except that number one, Richard Pryor's work in blue. A huge difference between their work and I think they used to argue about that sort of outside the lines. I think they used to argue.
Eddie Murphy Raw, he does a whole routine on that. How Bill Cosby got mad at him because he uses the word F, the F bomb
Right,
in
right,
his
right.
show. So he asked his friend Richard Pryor, and he said, remember, because it does the Bill Cosby, I would like to talk to you about the
I've
things
never seen the
that
Eddie Murphy stuff.
they. Are you kidding me?
I've never seen it. Yeah,
Like,
never seen it. No.
he's like, well, Bill Cosby comes up to me, he says, I would like to talk to you about the things that you
Yeah,
say in your show. Now, you can't
yeah.
say, and then he says it, right? And so he's like, yeah. So I talked to Richard Pryor. He's like, let me ask you a question. Do people laugh when you say that word? And he says, yeah. Well, then tell Bill to have a coconut smile and shut the F up. They were almost contemporaries. He came before him. He
Yeah,
started,
Cosby's a little older, right? Cosby's like
yeah,
born in the 30s. Richard
quite a,
Pryor's born
quite a,
1940, but
quite a
very,
bit.
very close.
Yeah. So, I mean, Pryor started in the 60s. He really kind of came to his own in the 70s. He was getting successful. He's a lot like George Carlin when apparently,
Totally. I
yeah,
was thinking the exact same thing.
he was
Yeah.
he had like a standing appearance in Vegas where he was at, I can't remember which theater it was. He was doing a show there every night, and he was,
But with the big guys of the day, like he's
yeah,
performing with Dean Martin, he's
yes,
on Ed
yeah,
Sullivan. It's just like George Carlin, except
yeah,
and both of them started out as just like these straight men. Like not
yes,
straight men,
yeah,
that's not the right word. But like they're wearing a suit and their hair is cut really short and
right.
they're working
And,
clean.
and they're doing that kind of silly sort of comedy that was a thing back
Hmm.
then. Like, remember George Carlin did the Daffy Weatherman guy, and hey,
Hmm. Hmm.
well, like the DJ guy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
different voices, and the story is great for those who don't know it. Pryor gets one night, it's at the Aladdin, that's what it was. It was the Aladdin Theater.
Okay.
One night he's performing there. He gets up, and like Dean Martin and all these famous people are in attendance, and he walks up to the microphone, and they said this is his like epiphany. He looks out at the
Yeah.
audience, and he just simply says, what the F am I doing here? And walks off. And he never came back.
Yeah.
And that was it. And that was the end of his clean performances. Apparently, he packed up and moved to Berkeley. He got into this. So this is like 68, 69. He
Uh-huh.
got
Yeah.
into like a lot of the kind of critical thinkers of the day.
By that you mean doing lots of acid and
Yeah,
hanging out
doing
with hippie
a lot of
girls and
acid. And, well,
Charles Manson and
experimenting with like, Eastern type of religions and
oh yeah.
Buddhism, Black Panthers and a lot of the what you'd call activists today, fell in with that crowd and then totally changed, totally reformed himself. I get, and that's not really the word.
Recreated.
Redefined, recreated himself.
Reformed sounds more positive than I think this was
I guess it
100%. I don't
depends on
know.
which side you're on.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway, so it's a fascinating story. I mean, the guy is, he was born in a brothel. His dad abused him, and I think he was sexually abused by the prostitutes there. And his grandmother ran the brothel. It's just
Hmm.
an insane story.
What I was thinking about it is it's a very classic boomer story.
Mhm.
Obviously, it's a different. It's a black boomer story, but it's a very classic. He lived through all the events of the same things that all the baby boomer people did, but
Yes.
like a little bit of a different version of it, right? Like, whereas their parents came back from the war and then they were born, he was born in a brothel like during the war, and then he participated in the hippie movement in California, and he didn't go to Vietnam. I think he's a little too old. He did get drafted into the army,
Mhm.
but then in the army he spent the whole time in jail.
Yeah, because he stabbed and beat up a white guy.
That was a crazy
That
story.
was
I
nuts.
don't. I have a feeling there's more to that story than what they were talking about. But the story, as I read it, was that there was a movie. I forgot what the movie is called, but apparently the movie has some kind of racially charged jokes in it.
Yeah.
And that there was a white guy, a white army officer, that was laughing at it too much. So these guys beat him up and stabbed him. And I'm like, that's not super sympathetic to just
Yeah.
attack some guy for laughing at
Right, I
something
know.
too much. Like,
Yeah.
I'm guessing that the guy was pointing at them in some way or including them and making fun. There was more to that story
More to
than
it.
that,
Yeah.
I think, but I don't
I
know.
hope.
You know who I also thought was kind of comparable, just like I didn't think of George Carlin, but that's 100% spot on, is Woody Allen, who
Mm.
started out as sort of like your classic get up in front of, an Ed Sullivan and make jokes and wear a suit, and then took this great big left-hand turn in the
Yeah.
60s And they performed together, Richard Pryor and Woody Allen, when they were young. There's a
Crazy.
lot of guys like that, and then there's Bob Newhart, who was like that, and then just was still like that when we were kids.
But
And
he
like,
was fun. He
oh,
was funny.
he was really, really funny, but
He
he
was
was
like the Mitch.
always that
He was
guy
like the
from the
Mitch
50s.
Hedberg of his day. Like just all these non sequiturs that from one thing to another, weird
Yep.
observations. Or Stephen Wright. Is that his name? Stephen Wright.
Yes, Stephen Wright. Stephen
Yeah.
Wright. I used to love Stephen Wright stuff when I was a kid. I
And
love
again,
that
Mitch
guy.
Hedberg is kind of like the newer version of him. Yeah, I used to do a lot of pot. I still do, but I used to too.
Yeah, that's very Stephen.
That's
Yeah, I don't
weird.
know if that's, I actually don't know if that's Stephen Wright or Mitch Hedberg,
Just
but
weird stuff like
yeah. So I
that.
never used Apple Music, right? Like I asked you, I was like, where is that? Because I looked on Spotify and I didn't have this. So I don't, I didn't even realize I have Apple Music. Apparently I do.
Yeah, if you've got an iPhone.
Okay, I didn't know if I have to be like paid to it or what, but I listened to this on Apple Music and it transitioned into Hannibal Buress. I don't know if you ever listened to him.
Huh.
He's really, really funny comedian from, I think he's actually getting to be kind of a little bit in the past, but like the early 2000s, he was like one of my favorite comics.
Mhm.
And I was listening to his stuff and I was like, Apple Music, you know what? Literally the only thing Hannibal Buress and Richard Pryor have in common is they're both black. Because Richard Pryor's comedy is nothing like Hannibal Buress is Bob Newhart.
Yes.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like wry observations and
Yeah.
it's for a more educated crowd, I think. Not
Yeah.
educated, that's not right. Because actually I started to respect Richard Pryor more during this as I listened to it.
Mhm.
It's not just for like the groundlings, you know. There is some brainy stuff going on, but Hannibal Buress is very like openly like verbal jokes and things that are for
Yeah. Yeah.
people like that went to college, like a different
Right.
set. So
Sure.
I just thought that was really funny of Apple Music. Your algorithm's not very sophisticated,
So
Apple.
Apple Music is saying they all look alike to me. Is that what it's saying?
Basically, it's
Yeah.
saying, yeah, there's a genre of comedian called black comedian, and
Yeah,
we're
go
gonna play
black.
those
And they're
together.
all the
Like,
same. Yeah, they're
yes,
all
it was like
yeah.
this is not. So why did you choose this one? How did this one get to the top of your list?
Well, actually, if you look at the list, we've already covered two of them. We got the Bill Cosby, we got the George Carlin.
Hmm.
This one's sort of now before Bill Cosby, you've got Lenny Bruce, which we haven't hit yet.
No, we haven't.
We probably should have started with that, but after George Carlin, you've got Richard Pryor. After Pryor, you've got Sam Kinison, Andrew Dice Clay, Bill
Uh-huh.
Hicks. So that's sort of the lineage there as far as like top albums of all time. So I just sort of figured out this is one that I hadn't heard. It sort of fell in line with the series that we were doing.
You just named the three people who've ever had to have a 5 second delay on Saturday Night
That's
Live
right. Yeah. Richard Pryor,
hosting. So
Sam Kinison, and Andrew Dice Clay.
and Andrew Dice Clay, and I don't know anything about Andrew Dice Clay.
He's
That's
pretty.
still
He's
I know what he looks like. I picture his face. I know how he
he's
talks.
in
I know
the city
kind
with
of.
you. You might meet him sometime on accident. You
Is
should
he still around? Is Andrew
Yeah,
Dice Clay still
you
kicking
should look
around?
up you
Okay.
should look up his on his YouTube. He does these weird things. He calls it like performance art. He messes with people on the street. I think his wife is filming or something like that, and he'll just walk up to people and he's like, "Are you the one that wanted the picture? You want the picture of me? Are you the one that wants the picture?" So they're like little old ladies or something. And they're like, "What? Who are you?" He's got his big sunglasses on. He's like, "Yeah, you wanted the picture? You want to take the picture?" So that'd be great if he walked up to you someday. But
Sure. Yeah. No, I
you're
probably would
pretty
react
funny.
pretty. That's one of the things that I've learned about something. Maybe it's even changed a little bit of the way I carry myself. Is that you have to be ready to go all the time here.
Yeah, yeah,
If people will walk up to you and they'll say stuff, and you have to like bounce it back, and then it's fun. Like New Yorkers do that. They walk up and they say some comment to you, and you have to say something back, and then you're like, yeah, okay, like
yeah,
we're both like cool, like. But when I first moved here, like I grew up in the suburbs.
yeah,
People
yeah,
don't just walk up and mess with you for no reason, and you're like, oh my God, and you shuffle away, and you're like
yeah, yeah,
embarrassed.
yeah.
Whereas like I've learned to just roll with it, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, they enjoy it there. Actually, in all the boroughs there, and I think I can't remember if he's Long Island or if he's. I think it's the Bronx. I can't remember. He's
To me, he has a Staten Island feel, but that may just be today. There may be
uh,
more. There's like a fossil population of those guys in Staten
yeah.
Island today. Like there's more of those kind of old school.
So it's a different time. Like you think of Andrew Dice Clay, you think of the Dice Man, right?
Yeah,
Hickory dickory dock, that whole thing. And
vaguely.
I won't go on because it's pretty bad. He
It's a
was like
Body Limerick,
he
right?
Huh? Oh yeah, very body. He was all dressed in like black leather, and he'd do this weird smoking thing over his head, all the junk. But he started out as a like impressionist. He would do impressions of Sylvester Stallone, John Travolta. He'd do this like whole. He would actually sing Grease like John Travolta and like do this production of it. And
So just famous Italian Americans,
yeah,
basically.
yeah, pretty much. So
That's his shtick. Okay.
The Dice Man was a character in his routine, right? And so it was sort of like you might be a redneck if you know that,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
who's Mater? Oh, what's that guy? Larry the Cable Guy. So Larry the Cable Guy,
Oh, is that who does Mater's voice?
yeah,
Larry the
yeah.
Cable Guy? Oh, I didn't
You
know
can't
that.
tell me you
Huh.
didn't know that. That was just a character in that comedian's routine. And
Hmm.
everybody loved it. He's like, yeah, I get this guy over at my house doing cables, Larry the Cable Guy. Hey, how you doing? And everybody loved that so much, he just did that. And then he
Yeah,
became
that's
the
funny.
cable guy. Well, that's what happened with Andrew Dice Clay, is everybody, oh, the Dice Man, do the Dice Man. And so that became his whole routine.
What's the character that Pryor does in this one? The one from Tupelo, Mississippi?
Mudbone.
Mudbone. That's right,
Mudbone.
Mudbone. Yeah.
So
What are your thoughts on that character, but also just in general characters in co comedy acts? I feel like
yeah,
that's kind of a dead art, right?
I
Like
think
nobody,
I think so. Yeah, I don't think they do that very much
I can't
anymore.
think of any modern comedians that have a character they do,
Yeah.
which is weird because that was a mainstay of comedy for
Well,
centuries, right? And then
Mudbone was I think I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that a character allows you to do something different than your normal routine, right?
sure, yeah,
It allows you to be literally a different person on stage. Not much of what Mudbone said was funny,
no.
and there were very few people laughing. But I was thinking about it and I was like, is this more of like an opportunity to be philosophical up there? Be more of a Mark Twain type of person where or a Will Rogers?
What you're saying now is touching on like where I started to feel like there was a deep quality to this album. Because
Yeah.
honestly, the first couple of tracks, I was like, it's old stuff. It's not that funny anymore. His voice is annoying me. But then I started to realize it's exactly what you're saying. I realized this is the kind of guy who gets a Mark Twain award
Yeah.
because he's commenting on things in a deep way. He's commenting on things in a deep way. And I think, yeah, the character was allowing him to do that. He started doing that in the Africa bit, is where I
Yeah.
started to hear some things where he was
Right.
commenting on
Yeah,
life in a bigger
exactly.
way.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
then when he gets into the stuff about his addiction and his incident, that's where you're like, okay, I don't think anybody ever did this before him.
Right.
I think this is the first person to ever do this in the history of comedy, as far as I know, to be like really real and like true about his own life, but
Yeah.
also blend it with comedy in that kind of way.
Yeah.
And people do that. I wouldn't say people do that all the time now, but there's quite a few really famous comedians who do it today, and it's some
Yeah.
of my favorite stuff. I was thinking about John Mulaney.
Yeah.
Do you know him?
Yeah.
He had like an addiction episode. He was an addict, and then he had an episode about it that was really bad. And then he did a special where he talked about it.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen without the Richard Pryor, I
Right.
don't think. And Louis C.K. going through his whole thing,
And
and
talking
Dave
about it.
Chappelle.
Yeah.
These are like, and I think these are some of like the greatest comedians alive today, and they're all doing something very similar to that. And so I think, yeah, I think the Mudbone character was kind of touching on that. I don't know what that character is. I guess like it's kind of just like the old timer, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the old black man at the barber shop from the South that's like sitting like telling you stories. Like when he's talking about like there was a time called hard times, it was
Yeah.
like that just sounds like something some old guy would say, and I get that I feel like I've heard that guy talk before.
Yeah. That's sort of, if you think about it, coming to America. I mean, that
Yeah,
he
exactly.
got those
Exactly.
characters at the barbershop,
Right.
Arsenio
Right.
Hall and Eddie Murphy, and they're doing this riffing and stuff like that.
And I
But
really like old I say old black guy at the barber shop, but it's just old Southern guy. Like that's a thing. Like there's
yeah, I think so. And maybe it's like, again, he was born in 1940. He was born during Jim Crow and stuff. I mean,
yeah,
he was
absolutely.
in Ohio. No, he was in Illinois.
He's from
Peoria.
Illinois,
Yeah.
but I imagine Peoria, Illinois felt a lot like the South
Well,
in
and I
1920.
imagine like maybe they had relatives in the South, maybe, or maybe,
But that area of if you go to Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana, those southern areas that are all along like the Ohio River there, those are pretty southern culturally. Like you
yeah.
definitely feel like it feels like St. Louis, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay.
It's like the South, but not really the South, but also totally the South in some ways. It's not like Chicago, let's just say. Peoria, someplace like Peoria. Not that I can actually think where is Peoria. I actually don't know. I know it's in Illinois, but I actually don't know where. Maybe I'm talking out of my butt. I don't know. Might be more like Gary. We should probably know of what we speak before we start
Yeah,
speaking about it.
that is a place name with like more vowels than I've ever seen.
That's a high ratio of vowels to consonants, right?
So that is
It's
wow.
got
So
everything but
it's
you.
it's actually in the northern part of the state. It's north of very far north of St. Louis, just north of
Okay.
Springfield. Well, that makes sense. It's not too far away from Chicago, which is
Okay.
where he
Okay.
ended up.
Yeah, that's why I started to think. I started thinking. I think I'm talking about something I don't. It's probably more like Gary, Indiana. It's probably like a very not a suburb of Chicago, but like an outlying city that's
Yeah,
very
it's
black.
not
That's
that
like
far. It's not that far at
yeah,
all. It's about as far away as Milwaukee is, so maybe an hour and a half.
yeah, like an hour, hour and a
Um,
half. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, I don't know. To me, those Midwestern states are just big lumps, and I don't know
but you
where
know what
everything.
they would have gotten? They would have gotten like that would have been part of the pathway of the Great Migration of the 1920s. So
Totally.
you would
Yeah.
have definitely known other African Americans from the South.
Some old guy
Yeah,
born in Tupelo, Mississippi that
yeah,
was in the neighbor. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, probably a lot
yes.
of those people. So
But
that
anyway, I just sort of saw it. I didn't see it as funny, but I saw it as
no.
him being able to say stuff in a humorous way. It's almost like dispensing advice. Like you gotta, be nice to women, and I don't know all this other stuff he was saying. Maybe it's a part of the routine where it allows him to step back, take a breath. Because right after that, he goes into the whole addiction part, and that's sort of the
Right.
last
Yeah, it was a transition of
bulk.
sorts, right?
Yeah,
I didn't really. This is his 17th comedy album. You think this is his best? Do you know the other ones at all? I mean, what is this
I
the
don't
one that's famous for being the best?
I don't know his others, but this is the one on the list that it might
Okay.
have something to do with the freebasing thing. I remember when that happened, and I think that's why he had to talk about it. This is something I was going to mention. Like he had to address it because there was an elephant in the room.
Of
It,
course.
it was in
Yeah.
the zeitgeist. I remember that joke that he tells at the end. I
Uh-huh.
remember people doing that. I was in elementary school, I think, so I would have been like 6 or 7. And I remember on the school grounds that kids are ruthless, man. But
Yeah, they really
saying that
are.
kind of, they got it from their dads or something, obviously. But so I mean, it was in the zeitgeist. Everybody was making a mockery of it. I don't remember watching on the news. I remember it on the playground.
I do too. I do too. And I got the two things mixed up because I didn't know what had happened to who. I knew the difference between Richard Pryor and Michael Jackson, obviously,
Mhm.
but both of them were set on fire right around the same time. And I had the two incidents kind of conflated in my because I'm like
Yeah,
you said, I'm like 6 years old.
right.
So I'm just hearing about these things. What happened to Michael Jackson got his hair caught on fire when they were filming a Pepsi commercial or
Yes,
something?
yes,
Okay, all right.
yeah.
And Richard Pryor set himself on fire while freebasing.
Freebasing.
Okay, so here's my big question of the day that
Uh-huh.
makes me sound very out of it and old, not even old, actually maybe too young. What is freebase? I don't know what that is. Is that crack? Is
So
that the same thing
no,
as
no, it's
crack?
cocaine, and it's where you use a solvent to separate the purest part of the cocaine from like all the rest of it. So they would use
Oh, that's why his aunties were saying he was doing chemistry.
you could use ether or
Okay.
something else. Supposedly, what he was using was Bacardi 151.
Oh, so this was part of the process of making this stuff.
Yes.
Is why. Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
So supposedly it spilled on him or it exploded in his face, got it all over himself, set himself on fire.
This is kind of like somebody getting hurt in a meth lab explosion, like a similar kind of incident.
Yeah,
This is
something
like,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he's not a drug dealer, but he's making his own stuff and apparently was injured. Well, okay. But it's cocaine. All right.
Yeah. So it's
I didn't really.
coke.
But what's crack then? Isn't that what crack is?
I
Isn't
think
crack
crack,
like you
crack
distill something out of the
I think
cocaine?
so. I think it's rock cocaine. That's all I know. It's not
Okay.
crystallized. And
Okay.
so you burn that and smoke it
Uh-huh.
versus snorting it or something like that. And I think it's maybe a faster. I'm talking out my butt. I've never done coke.
Yeah.
I've never even
Yeah.
seen it
Yeah.
before, but
No, that's okay. Yeah.
I would assume that the crystallized powder form maybe is more purified and therefore more expensive or something like that, whereas crack is not. I don't know. I don't think.
Apparently it's cheap.
I
So.
guess I don't know. But no, so yeah, freebasing is where you're able to make it even more.
Like if cocaine's not enough for you,
Yeah,
you need
exactly.
more. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah.
yeah. So
That seems very debauched to
do you
me.
get the drink then?
Is it about the Michael Jackson incident?
We're having rum and Pepsi.
Why Pepsi because of Michael Jackson or
Yes, yes.
oh okay, all right. I thought
Rum,
maybe it was.
rum because of Richard Pryor, Pepsi because of Michael Jackson.
Okay, all right. So we're conflating those incidents. It's not
Yes.
just me. Like, yeah,
Yeah, so
okay. All
ladies and
right.
gentlemen, I distastefully chose to have us do rum and Pepsis in honor of Richard Pryor and Well, let's
Okay.
say just say the early 80s. Now,
Yeah,
however,
the early 80s.
did you realize that Bacardi discontinued 151 in 2016 to try to clean up their image?
Oh, I bought Everclear for something we did on the show one time. So no, I didn't know that. I
Yeah,
have a
well,
bottle of Everclear.
Everclear is totally that's completely different. But yeah, the
Yeah.
Bacardi 151 is purified, refined rum.
Why
That
does that exist? Who's is are people drinking that?
well, people would use it as a floater oftentimes. So you could make like a mixed drink, like a zombie or some type of tropical drink, and then float that on the very top. And so oftentimes they would
Okay.
use it for drinks that you set on fire,
Okay.
like the drink called the Richard Pryor. Actually, that would be funny, but
Oh.
there's not a drink called the Richard Pryor. There is, however, a drink called the Freebase, a cocktail, where it's a
Okay.
shot. It's a shot, and what you do, I think it's layered Kahlua, Bailey's, with a floater of 151 at the top, and then you set that on
Set
fire,
it on fire.
and then
What was the drink we
put it
set on fire?
you put a straw in it, and then you drink it from the bottom. I can't remember. This was so long ago. We've been doing this for a long
There was
time.
something we did it in the studio and we set some was it an Irish car bomb or was that what we did for
Gosh,
some I still have that bottle of Everclear because what in
yeah.
God's name would you ever use that
I
for?
don't know.
It's
It's
just been
dangerous to make those, but
sitting around for a long. But that's funny. So this drink is based on
it
the
is.
Michael
It is. So the
Jackson.
Michael
Yeah.
Jack, he had like basically hair product in his hair,
Yeah. Okay.
to straighten it out, like Soul Glow. Or what they had, like he was coming down like stairs during the commercial doing his singing or whatever, and there would be pyrotechnics set
Yeah.
up at each side of him. It was on the seventh take that this
Hmm.
happened, and it hit his head, and his head goes up like a match head.
See, that's less. I feel worse laughing about that because that's he didn't do anything wrong. Like at least
Definitely
Richard.
didn't.
I mean, Richard. I mean, I guess it's not funny to laugh at somebody who has a drug addiction, I
Yeah.
suppose. But at the
Yeah.
same time, at least it's self-inflicted, right?
Right.
Michael Jackson's just doing his job, like doing a Pepsi commercial, and that
Yeah.
happened. When would that have been? When did that happen?
That was 84, I think.
So it was after Thriller. This is like
Yes.
between Thriller and Bad,
Oh
basically. Is
yeah.
when
Well,
that.
it had to have been because he was like Thriller made him Michael Jackson.
Yeah, I think. Well, I don't know. I look back sometimes and I'm like, no, he was pretty big before. I mean, to me, that's when I knew Michael Jackson. But like I said, I was 6, so I didn't really know any better. But he was. I think he was. He had like solo albums that were popular. Well, whatever. That's a Michael Jackson podcast. For some reason, we haven't done a Michael Jackson
Right.
podcast
Yeah.
yet. I don't know why. We really
Yeah,
need to do
yeah, we
that.
need
But
to do Thriller. My goodness.
yeah, Thriller would
Um,
be good. The Thriller would be a lot of fun. But how are you reacting to the comedy in this? Just purely comedy, not the storytelling, not those other aspects, but just the pure
I
comedy.
sort of felt the same way. The very first track's called Women. It was okay. He was married and divorced 7 times, I think. I guess you could say he knows about women, but not how to keep them. Second track was called Prison. It wasn't until the third track. That was interesting because that's when
I like the stir crazy. I like how
yeah,
he's
he's talking about making
Gene
the movie with
Wilder,
Gene
yeah.
Wilder. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that had some good bits in it. Africa had
And the part where he was like, I went to the penitentiary and I have to say, I am glad we have penitentiaries.
we have penitentiaries, right? Yeah,
It was like,
yeah,
yeah, that would be that'd be the response when you meet the
yeah.
people that are actually in jail. Yeah.
Africa was
Pretty
funny because
terrifying.
it was pretty deep. It's talking
A
about
little
how
bit more so, yeah, and a little smart. Except he pronounced it a gazelle, which was driving me crazy. He
Gazelle, that
kept
was
talking about
driving
the
me
gazelles. I was
crazy
like,
too.
what's a
Yeah.
gazelle? Anyway.
Track 4 is Mafia Club. That was annoying a little bit.
I thought so too. I thought
Yeah.
so too. And the funny thing is, when I was in high school, I used to come up to New York and I would stay with my friend's big sister who lived here.
Mhm.
She was dating a comedian. And he would come over and we would all like sit around and he would like, work bits kind of while he was talking to us. And we're kids, so we're listening, we think it's hilarious. He had this bit about mafia guys
Yeah.
and he was doing this voice. And I'm looking back and I'm like, oh, Michael, you're just ripping off Richard Pryor. We were like laughing our butts off listening to him tell this joke. And it's like a riff on the
Yeah.
on this bit from Richard Pryor, which is not a great I think but it's the storytelling aspect of
Yeah.
it that I really enjoyed. The part where he's saying how he tried to rob these guys
Yeah.
with the blank pistol.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story to me. Like I listened to that, but the funny, it's not that funny. I don't maybe it's
It's
just
not that
old.
funny.
It's old. I don't know.
See, but here's the thing though, like, okay, so I mentioned Lenny Bruce. Every comedian alive points at Lenny Bruce as being the kind of genesis of comedy. Before that, you had Bob Newhart. They'd go up and tell jokes. Remember George Burns? It's
Yeah.
like, say goodnight, Gracie. Good night, Gracie. Ha
Yeah.
ha ha.
Really, really funny, by the way. His
Oh,
stuff was pretty funny.
he had some,
Go
but
back.
it was just he was telling jokes.
Yes. Yeah.
Two bulls walk into a bar, or something like that. or whatever it
George
happens to be.
Burns. I don't know if you know more about George Burns than I do, but was he really famously racist against Polish people? I don't
I
know.
don't. I think he might have been one. I don't know.
Yeah, he might have been. Who
Actually,
knows? Yeah, Burns.
Poles were
Burns is probably his stage name.
Poles were a big target.
Even when I was a kid, people used to tell,
Like how can you
"Are
tell?
we allowed? Are we allowed to say Polak on a family?" I don't know. I
I
would
think
never use
so.
the word Polak to talk
Well,
about a
it was
person.
they would tell jokes like, how can you tell when it's a Polish wedding? Why all their bowling shirts are dry cleaned or something like that. It's something stupid like
People
that.
used to just say things like, when you'd shoot a basket
Uh-huh.
and hit just the net, like not go through the rim, but just hit the net on the bottom, people would say that's a Polak swish.
Well,
And I
you
was
have
like,
things like
what?
Irish
Why?
goodbye.
This
I
is
mean,
in the
there's
90s. This is
yeah,
in the 19. Why are people telling jokes about Polish people in the 1990s?
but I mean, you got something called a paddy wagon. It's called that for
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes things are
you
just,
know.
yeah. We've
Term,
talked about Scottish Inn and Scotch tape before,
yeah, the
right?
term, he gypped me. That comes from, gypsy. I mean, there's all kinds.
I have to cop to saying gypped all the time. I didn't even connect it with gypsies. I don't even
Gypsy.
know if I would have stopped saying it if I did
But
connect it with gypsies.
that word makes a lot of sense because they're, infamous in Europe for thievery, we shall say.
Well,
Uh,
by that logic, Polak swish makes sense because they're infamous for being stupid. That's how racist jokes work.
well,
They're,
they're good
they're always
plumbers. They're the good plumbers, though. So before Lenny, actually, even after Lenny Bruce, there were still a lot of comedians that would just tell these jokes, right? Two Scots walk into a bar or whatever. It was all these dumb jokes. But Lenny Bruce was the first to make observations. He had one. He's like, "Hey, dig, man, they arrest you if you're gay, right? And then they put you in prison with a bunch of men."
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he's like, "What's that about?" Right? So he would just do these observational things on culture and things, that don't make sense, and he would work blue. That's why he was getting arrested all the time, and vanity laws, and
Did you ever watch Mrs. Maisel?
the fabulous Mrs. Maisel. I
Yeah.
watched a couple of episodes. That was
Yeah. Lenny Bruce was basically like they treated him like he was like Yoda to
yeah,
her. He
yeah,
would show up and he was like this a wise old
yeah,
comedian that would talk
right.
to her. It was really interesting
I mean,
perception of Lenny Bruce that had
yeah.
evolved. But
Well, I
so
mean, and that show is written by comedians too. I mean, there's comedians in the writers' room, so they all sort of like hold him in awe. I know Joe Rogan is like all, oh, Lenny Bruce and stuff. Richard Pryor
Richard,
one of his inspirations as well. So
yeah, Richard Pryor is he's very, I mean, a lot of it is just, I think it's the cussing is a lot of it. Like a lot of it is
maybe.
just one of the first
But
people to
if
swear.
you've got an audience of people in their 20s or 30s, you only have so Lenny Bruce was like 60s in the late 60s, mid to late 60s. So you only have about historically about 15 years when this album comes out of that type of what we know now is comedy. This is what
Right.
comedy is now. But you still have like the Bob Newharts, people telling jokes, George
Hmm.
Burns, things like that, the joke tellers. That was still part of it. I'm just saying that like that crowd would be having a different experience than we are. Which so it's kind of
Definitely.
you know what I mean?
Definitely.
It's
Just the
kind of
release of hearing somebody use adult language, I think, was a big deal.
for sure.
Everybody was so buttoned up for so many years that in the 70s, the first time you hear George Carlin or Richard Pryor drop an F-bomb, you're like, oh, thank God somebody's talking the way people actually talk. Lenny
Yeah.
Bruce, same thing. You're like, this is how people actually talk on the street.
Or
And
or
so it gives it,
one that I forgot is Bob Hope. Bob Hope would just tell jokes, right? I want everybody to, after this episode, not now, go out to YouTube and search for Bob Hope losing it in Las Vegas over cables. Just search that.
did you say over cables?
Yeah, over cables, because
Okay.
he's mad at the GD cables. Why the F can't you get this effing stuff right? GD blah blah. And he's just going off because they're running cables across the stage, and he's going to trip on the GD cables. And you've never seen Bob Hope like this before because he
Right.
doesn't work in blue.
Did you watch the dramatization of the first night of Saturday Night Live that they did on Netflix recently?
No, I didn't. I didn't watch that.
It's actually pretty funny. It's fun to watch. It's really nice. It's really fun to see all these young people doing like their Chevy Chase impression and
Oh
stuff
yeah.
like that. Like it's kind of fun. But Milton Berle shows up on the show, played by the guy who is in Spider-Man that plays the chief of the guy
Yeah,
who
yeah,
won the
yeah.
Academy Award. What's
That's a
that
good one.
actor?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
I can't remember. But anyway, he's Milton Berle in that. He's really good. And you're like, Milton Berle's
yeah.
dirty, like a
Yeah.
really dirty old man.
He is. Yeah.
Like, I don't think he actually did that. I think he would be would hint at it in his
Yeah.
public persona, but like behind the scenes, like he was really
There's
obnoxious.
some that you got that just what's that Rickles what's his
Don
name
Rickles.
Don Rickles like
Yeah.
Jackie Mason, Jackie Gleason, they're all stand up, off stage they would talk a blue streak.
Yeah.
Don Rickles, my favorite story of Don Rickles is one night he sees Frank Sinatra. This is like in the 60s, apparently. He sees Frank Sinatra. And then, he knew Sinatra. And he sees him at this famous LA, or maybe it was a New York restaurant. He comes in and he goes up to him. He whispers, he's like, "Hey, Frankie." He's like, "Hey, I'm here with a date. I want to impress her. Can you come over to our table and say hi so she'll know that I know you and she'll get impressed?" And Sinatra's like, "Yeah, sure, Don, no problem." And so they go and they sit down, they're eating. And Sinatra comes up to him. He's like, "Hey, Don, how you doing, man? It's been a while since I've seen you." And Rickles goes, "Hey, Frankie, can you not bother me right now? Can't you see me?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And Sinatra just laughs and walks away. I was
I've
like,
seen
"Oh,
enough
that's
of his
awesome."
insult stuff that's perfect. That's absolutely a
He's
joke he would.
he's so great. Yeah,
And Frank Sinatra would have liked it.
he
Frank
would have
Sinatra
oh
would
yeah,
have gotten that
he
and
would have
laughed.
laughed.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's good.
all I'm saying is it was a different time. And I sort of made this argument with the Carlin too, like the best album that Carlin ever did, supposedly. So much of it, I was like, wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the time, people were just going nuts.
Do you know what it reminds me of? That like, I think maybe each generation has this experience where you see something and you're like, "Oh, that's the way we talk." The first time I had that experience, I think, was Clerks. I remember I
Okay.
watched the
Yeah,
movie
yeah. I
Clerks,
can see that.
and I was watching it and I was just like, "Oh my God, that's the way me and my friends talk." And
Yeah.
they started, and I was thinking that at the beginning of the movie, and then there's a part where they start talking about Star Wars, and I was like, "Okay, are they just recording what my friends and I talk
Yeah.
about?" It's literally right at
Kevin,
so.
Kevin Smith lives in your head, huh?
I
Yeah.
think it just represented the generation. There was something about the way they spoke where I
Yeah.
was like, this is how we actually talk. This just
That's a good
sounds like you
point because
recorded our
the only
conversation.
thing that ever bummed me about Quentin Tarantino and
Hmm.
the author Elmore Leonard, like those are
Oh,
two of
okay.
the best people with dialogue. I
Uh-huh.
mean, two
Yeah,
of the
totally.
best dialogue writers in the world. But nobody talks like that.
No,
Nobody's that
no,
cool because they do
no.
the back and forth and
But
and
that was more like aspirational, right? That you're like, this is great dialogue. It doesn't sound like how we actually talk, but it's cooler than how we talk. It's better.
it is cooler than how we talk.
Yeah.
To me, that ruins it.
In a way, yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. When I saw Clerks, I was like, no, this is the vernacular of me and my friends. This is
Right.
exactly how we talk in the conversations we have. So, and also, to be honest, it was the first time I'd seen something that was that dirty. It was a dirtier level. I don't even think my friends and I talked quite that dirty. Like you said, it was kind of want a lot of the jokes. Maybe not as bad as Carlin, although I've heard Carlin be really funny. The bit he does about your stuff is like one
Yeah.
of the
Stuff. Yeah.
that's
My stuff.
funny. That's just
Stuff.
still
Yeah.
funny, right? But that's more classic Bob Newhart style humor in a lot of ways.
Maybe. Yeah.
It's
Maybe.
funny. It's a funny observation on things, and it's. I was listening to Pryor in the beginning, and I was hearing the crowd. The crowd is just eating it up,
Yeah.
right? The crowd is like hooting and hollering, just going like totally on board with everything he says. And I think that he was extremely charismatic. And I think he could just own an audience and bring them along. And he was kind of like almost, I don't know if bullying is the right word because they're enjoying it, but just using the force of his personality to
Mm.
make people laugh and go along with him. And the comedian I thought of when I was listening to him, and this is not a favorable comparison, but the comedian I thought of was Dane Cook. Have you ever seen Dane Cook's stuff?
Yeah.
And what he does is he gets up there and kind of yells at the audience.
Yeah.
And the women love him because he was very handsome when he was young.
Yeah.
And everybody's just really falling all over themselves laughing at him. And it's just like he's just kind of carrying along. But you listen to the material, like the material's not particularly
Yeah.
funny. And it's so not funny that I was sitting at a bar one time and I was looking at the TV and it was this comedian on TV and I'm watching. I'm like, oh, what is that guy's name? What is that guy's name? And this girl sitting next to me, she looks up and she goes, "Oh, this guy is so not funny." And I was like, Dane Cook. Like, when she said not funny, Dane Cook's name popped into my head.
One of the problems with listening to a comedy album, it's almost like listening to an episode of any 70s sitcom with a laugh
Yeah,
track.
yeah,
Somebody walks into the room and trips, and they
yeah,
ha ha ha, that's so funny.
right.
And you're going, what? Why is that funny? So I'm listening to it, I'm like, is it a different experience being there?
Oh, of
Like,
course.
like maybe he had an opener because it's only an hour long. So maybe he had an opener or a few openers, and it's at the end of the 2 hour that you bought the ticket for. You're probably about three drinks in, and then everybody around you is laughing.
That's
Does
the
that make
number
it more
one.
funny?
That's the number one thing. The
Like, does
people
that?
around you laughing. Yeah.
Yeah. So when other people are laughing and you laugh at them laughing, or laughing with them laughing because that's so funny. I don't know. So there's something to that, right? I mean, it's a more of a communal experience of being there type
A
of
hundred. I
thing.
totally laughing. is something that's better when you share it with a bunch of other people.
Right.
Like
Right.
when I sit here and I watch like a Netflix comedy special, I might laugh out loud twice and not particularly loud, even if the thing is really funny. But when I go to a like we went to see Jim Gaffigan, who's not at the top of his game right now, if I'm being honest.
Oh, okay.
But we were laughing out loud the
Yeah.
whole time because everybody's laughing and you're having a great time. I think that's 100% a communal experience, like going in. I think a lot of these things, films, I think are like that.
Yeah.
Like I did the podcast episode about watching Wild at Heart, the David Lynch movie. I don't know if I would have enjoyed that anywhere near as much if I watched it at home by myself. But I
Right.
loved it seeing it with a theater. So
Yeah.
maybe I'm old, but communal experiences are better, 100%. And
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think, and actually they say, it's interesting, not to, this is a weird segue, but like they say the whole like Hitler charisma was because there were 50,000 people there.
sure.
And he's yelling, and when everybody gets all ramped up,
Hmm.
everybody around him, like you're drawing off everybody else's energy. Everybody's getting ramped up with everything he's saying, and
And the energy of the lived experience of having been in Germany before Hitler, if you know what I mean, all those
yeah.
terrible years after World War
Yeah,
One
I
and
mean, but
depression
I'm
and
just
stuff.
I'm just saying like the performative of it. But see, performative can only go so far. Like you watch a commercial for like a politician.
Hmm.
I always, told this to my class when we talk about pathos, ethos, and logos. And I talked
Hmm.
about like there's this commercial. It was Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, right, when they're running against Obama. Some Democrat PAC released a commercial about this old lady being pushed in a wheelchair. And it's talking about how Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan want to privatize Social Security and they want to privatize Medicare. At the end of the commercial, swear to God. And you don't see that in the wheelchair, you only see the person pushing the wheelchair, you see him in a suit, but you only see him from like chest down because it's focusing sort of on the grandma in the wheelchair. And at the end of the commercial, he literally dumps her off of a cliff. And it talks about how Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan want to take away grandma's want to kill grandma. And,
Wow.
and I was using it as a demonstration of pathos, right?
Right.
What I'm saying is that pathos has a different effect when you're surrounded by other people that are
Of
into
course.
versus
Yeah.
by yourself in your living room and you're like, wait, what? They're gonna throw
Yeah.
grandma off a cliff? That's stupid.
This is kind of tangential, but you remember the ad that was like the ad in the most recent election where it was like Kamala's not for you, she's for they them. And
That's funny,
there
actually.
was the ad that was about like Kamala Harris wants to pay for trans prisoners to get sex change. I was at a bar, we were watching the Mets game, the Mets Phillies game in the NLCS, and that commercial came on, and I'd never seen it before, and I laughed out loud. Like everybody in the bar turned around to look at me. I was like, did nobody else just see that?
She's not for you, she's for they them. That's really a funny line, whoever came up with that.
Yeah, yeah, it is actually a funny, but just the idea that there were just what was being said in the commercial was
Yeah.
just, I don't know what people thought I was laughing at, but I
Yeah.
wasn't laughing necessarily with the commercial.
Wait, were you not wearing your MAGA hat?
No, I was
Oh,
not.
what?
If you were gonna find a sympathetic audience,
Yeah.
it would be at that Mets Phillies
Yeah,
watch
Mets,
party
yeah.
at the Mets
Not
bar.
the
You know, they might,
Yanks, but the
yeah,
Mets, for sure, yeah. Okay, so my pick, biggest surprise for you.
yeah. The biggest surprise for me, darn, I don't really know how much actually outright surprised me here. Because I actually had a higher opinion of the comedy going in, and then then my opinion went down in the first couple of tracks, but
Uh-huh.
then it went back up to where I thought it would have been, where he's like a Mark Twain prize kind of comedian. Like I think he was mixing the funny that was getting everybody in the crowd to laugh with a few anecdotes that were actually storytelling and like smart observations about society and things. So I don't really know if there was anything that surprised me all that much. I think this is pretty much what I expected to get when I listened to this.
This is just something else. My respect for Jim Brown went up
Yeah, Jim Brown sounded super
like
cool, didn't
20
he?
degrees after this because
Yeah.
he was always a serious dude. He was like, very pro like African American cause for civil rights with MLK Jr. and everything else. He's always been like that. I mean, the guy is the best, was the best running back in the world ever, just run people over all the time for the Browns. But he was also such a deep thinker. He's the only friend of Pryor that didn't want him to do drugs and like held him
Well, and the
accountable.
part where he was like, I think it speaks to the man's charisma, to Pryor's charisma, that like Jim Brown was basically Jim Brown's the only person around who's like, I'm not impressed by you.
Yeah, I'm not
Like,
impressed
I
with
don't
it.
care that you're Richard Pryor because I'm Jim Brown.
Yeah.
You know,
What
like
are you going to do? What are you
Yeah,
gonna
what are you going to do? Like he could talk to him in an even way. Was Richard Pryor not going to hang out with Jim Brown anymore?
right,
Like
right.
it's
He's
not
like,
going to happen,
you're not
Like,
yeah, I'm not impressed with
and
you.
that's what he says. He's like I was intimidated, and he was like not physically because obviously Jim Brown could destroy
Yeah,
Richard
of
Pryor
course,
if
yeah,
you're talking about physically, but he meant like the charisma of Jim
right,
Brown was
yeah.
what was, and I was like, yeah, that's perfect. That's a great
That's really
observation.
cool. Yeah, that was
That's the only person that could really speak truth to you is somebody who's like your equal like that. And
yeah,
who the heck was Richard Pryor's equal in
yeah.
1980? Almost nobody. I thought that was pretty. You know what? Actually, I would say the biggest surprise for me was kind of like his learning about like his kind of criminal past, how kind of dark his upbringing was and stuff like that. Like growing up in a brothel and getting arrested for stabbing somebody and like trying to rob those Italian guys and stuff like that. That's harder than I thought Richard
So
Pryor would
here's the
have.
thing. Like Adam Carolla always has a really interesting point, and he says, the real white privilege is if you're white, you don't have to care about anybody else. Like you don't speak for me, and I don't speak for you.
Right, right,
But in the
right.
black community, it's like I speak for all black men. If you're
Mhm.
black, he always tells a
Even
story.
if you don't want to be speaking for all
Right.
black people.
Matter of fact,
Yeah.
he tells a story. I think it's Jim Brown. He's like he's on an airplane. And there's like Jim Brown and some other like a black comedian or something like that. They didn't know each other, but they saw each other on the plane and they're like, "Hey, what's up? Hey, what's up?" After the plane landed and everybody got up, they went over and then hugged each other. Like, "Yeah, what's up, man?" And they had to because they're black. That's what Adam Grohl says. Like,
Yeah.
if I saw Jim Gaffigan, I'd be like, "Hey," and I just walk off the plane. It's like,
Right.
okay, there you go.
Right.
You're a
Yeah.
white guy. I'm a white guy. Let's go. I guess what I'm getting to is I didn't mean to interrupt your surprise, but this is what I'm wondering.
No, that was it.
Because
That was
my
all.
biggest surprise was his sexuality.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know a lot about, or I had heard rumors about, but it was confirmed when researching for this. So
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
admittedly bisexual. Apparently, had a lot of fun with other men in the late '60s and '70s.
I guess so, yeah.
Um, but I'm just wondering, like, he's a black guy, and his audience was composed primarily of a black audience,
It was probably getting whiter over the years, I would
maybe
guess.
wider over the years. But how much experience does he share with other black people in the U.S.? I guess is what I'm saying. I mean, he is such an outlier in all of the
Yeah.
things that he experienced in his life. Born in a brothel, raised in a brothel, worked for
Yeah.
the mafia, sexually abused by prostitutes. He was part of the hippie thing, psychedelic era in the '60s, bisexual, homosexual. Yeah, but he's black, so we're black and we have to support him because he speaks for us. I'm like, huh, that's really interesting. But then I guess that the whole Africa track sort of does put it in perspective because there is a common thing that African Americans in the U.S. have in common is this origin of slavery, right? And going back to his roots, as he said, to kind of explore them. I guess it's just really interesting. I don't know. It's just something interesting to think about. His experience was uncommon,
Yes.
so I doubt it. Very few people in the audience could identify with where he came from, how he grew up, the things that he went through, the things that he experienced. However, they all have this one common thing, and he goes to Africa and he sort of talks about that and sort of makes that.
Right.
And you got to wonder, is he doing that to bring it back to where we all share this thing in common to
Uh-huh.
identify with the audience more? Because I'm sure.
Yeah, obviously there are things I think, especially back then, that would have been common to the black experience for like everybody, right? It would have just been like living in white America and being
Yeah,
black. There
sure.
would have been things you could all talk about, and you would all share
Yeah,
those no matter who you are.
right.
But at the same time, I kind of wonder, like he has this kind of hard upbringing. He's cussing all the time and stuff like that. Is he really all that representative, or is there's some people that talk about it as if it's almost like a performance?
Yes. See, that's what I'm saying.
It's kind of like what we talked about
Yeah.
with gangster rappers when we were talking
Right.
about Dr. Dre. It's like it's kind of BS, right? For
Yes.
them, it was like
Yeah,
BS. They
for
weren't really
sure.
those kind of. Richard Pryor does seem to have been that kind of person when he was
Right.
young. But for
Well,
like Dr. Dre, it was like a put on that he was a lot tougher than he really was.
well,
And
he
I
was.
almost like to sell it to white America to be like, oh, yeah, this is what you think black people are. Well, here, I'll tell you that
Yeah.
story.
But see, I don't know if he was like that. Like, if you could say that he was like that when he was young. I'm saying that they couldn't identify with him because he was so much of an outlier on
Yeah.
the typical experience of an African American in the '60s and '70s, right? As a writer, maybe as a rhetorical purpose, the whole Africa bit is to then bring them back in and say, yeah, we have this common bond.
Also, one of the things to think about, and I've seen this happen with other comedians. I've seen this happen with a lot of Dave Chappelle is a really good example. Louis C.K. is the exact same thing. Is that they start out being very able to relate to their audiences. They're like the common man, and they share the same experiences. And then obviously they get successful. They start making a lot of money, and then Dave Chappelle's talking about how hard it is to defend his house and have people not break in and things like that. And half the audience is like, I
Huh?
don't really
Yeah,
have anything worth stealing, and I don't
yeah,
know what you're
yeah.
talking about. And like, it's a little bit harder to identify with them after a
Right.
while. Their
Well,
life
that
diverges
might be
from
more like
anybody.
aspirational. Like,
Maybe.
let me tell you
Maybe.
guys about what you can do. I guess what surprised me the most was finding out about his sexuality.
Yeah,
Uh, it doesn't bother
sure.
me or anything like that. It's just really interesting because
Probably connected to his upbringing, honestly. His
I think
upbringing
connected to his
sounds like.
upbringing, but I think it also talks about a little bit more about his,
Do you remember Eddie Murphy getting in trouble for getting caught with like a transsexual prostitute at some point?
was
Is
that
that,
did Eddie Murphy do that? I thought
am
that
I
was,
remembering that wrong? I'm pretty sure that happened.
I think Hugh Grant did. But
No, Hugh Grant was like a heterosexual a woman
you sure?
prostitute.
Hmm,
Yeah.
okay.
But like on the Sunset Strip, if I remember right. And then
I
I'm
thought it
pretty
was
sure Eddie Murphy, same location, but got arrested for picking up like a trans prostitute.
well, maybe.
I don't know. It's like the Michael Jackson Pepsi thing. I'm kind of vaguely remembering these stories
Right.
from when I was.
To me, it just made it more interesting. Sexuality, learning about that just made it more
Mhm.
interesting
Yeah.
somehow. And it spoke a little bit more like, oh, he's, I hate to say this, but it almost like he's a little bit more of a deeper thinker to know that he has sort of this in his past. And I'm not saying you have to explore that to be a deep thinker. It's just
More of a free thinker in a way,
free
if you
thinker,
think about,
perhaps.
yeah, like
Yeah,
somebody, yeah.
maybe. That was really kind of interesting. Which I guess and not to compare the two, but knowing that like Ice Cube, I believe, went to art school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tupac went to Juilliard. Knowing
So,
those things,
so they're gay because they went to art school. Nice.
exactly. Well, the
Nice.
questions
Yeah.
about Tupac, I'll probably get shot for that. But anyway, I'm not equating the two, but I'm just saying
Right.
it makes
You're
them
just saying Richard Pryor was bisexual
it
and
makes it
Tupac and
it
Tupac went to
provides
Juilliard. Same thing.
it provides more dimensions to them. You know,
That's true.
it
Well,
does.
it's not what you expect from the stereotype that they're putting
Yeah,
forth,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
A lot of what they're doing is this stereotype of like drug addicted, violent
Yeah.
black man to some extent. And then they're also like, oh, and by the way, I'm bisexual. And
Or
then you're like,
whatever.
oh,
Or
huh.
by the way, I have an art history degree or something. Or
Or yeah, or by the
yeah,
way, I haven't,
by the way,
or like,
I got accepted to Juilliard or something. I was like,
and
what?
Kanye's mom was a professor at
Yeah, yeah,
University of
exactly. So
Chicago.
it's like,
You're
yeah,
like, oh,
University of
that's not,
Chicago. Yeah.
not that honestly, not that Kanye ever put forward that gangster image. That's really not part of
He never
his,
tried to. It was always creative.
not the same as the other people in that way. But
We're sort of at that part though, aren't
I
we?
think so. I think we need to decide whether we're toasting this classic.
Well, it's not a we thing, it's a you thing.
Do you have any arguments?
It's hard, it's difficult.
May it please the podcast.
It's difficult. I will say that again, I guess one of my arguments I already sort of tried to make, which was that this is a different time. So be a bit forgiving on it. But I think,
Always a big caveat with old
yeah,
comedy. I mean, it's
yeah.
hard. Old comedy's hard.
But I think, there's certain tracks in here that were pretty deep. Africa, Freebase, Hospital,
Yeah.
those were all pretty. The prison one, I think he was not a new approach, but I mean, he was one of those Lenny Bruce descendants who was saying like, okay, let's talk about philosophy, but I'm going to wrap it up, especially the Africa one. Well, the Freebase one too, because like when he's talking about Jim Brown and he's talking about freebasing, there's a lot of philosophy in there. There's a lot of like what friendship is, and there's a lot of like, what power
Hmm.
is and stuff, but it's wrapped up in comedy. And there's not a lot of people that are doing it. And that's probably why this one is up there. I haven't listened to any of the others, but maybe I'm assuming
No.
that they're not as deep as this one. You can argue that, well, this isn't that deep. Well, there's some parts that are deep, and I think that separates it from a lot of the earlier stuff, which are just jokes. And his legacy, I will put that out there. His force of legacy as a comedian and just as a celebrity and character. He had MS, multiple sclerosis, but he was still doing comedy in LA up until, not very long before he passed away. He'd get up there with his little scooter apparently onto stage and tell jokes as much as he could and joke about himself. And he was kind of a rock star in the comedy world. So I don't know.
Oh, 100, yeah, not kind of. Like the rock star of the
Yeah, the
comedy
rock
world
star
for
for
a couple
sure.
of years there. There's comedy that is of its time that's like really funny at the time.
Yeah,
Really, I mean, and you're listening to this and you could hear the way the audience is reacting, and the first couple of tracks are just comedy of its time, super hilarious to the people that are listening to it. None of it is really landing with me today. It just sounds like something I've heard a million times.
yeah,
And then we say that all the time with these things, is that sometimes something gets copied so much that it's not funny anymore, or not good anymore. So there's that to consider. Sometimes things, like I said, like George Carlin's bit about your stuff and moving your stuff around is timeless. It's
yeah.
funny, it's a great observation, it's funny at any time. It probably wasn't as funny as some of his stuff to audiences in the 70s. But over time, because it just makes sense to everybody, it's still funny today. You're still laughing along with it. So I think that's kind of what the first half of this album is suffering from. It's the funniest thing in the world in 1982, and it's just not that funny today. But later in the album, I think you start to hear, and I keep referring to this, but you start to hear why he's like a Mark Twain prize winner.
Yes.
Because there's like a really important way that comedians can approach truth and comments on our society that's not available to somebody that just got up there and talked. You wouldn't listen to that person if they just got up and talked. It's kind of like how music can reach you in a different way. It's like you get everybody together by telling a bunch of like wiener jokes for half an hour,
Yeah,
and then you start making wry observations on society and like what's wrong with society, and people are still listening. And then you open up your heart and tell a story about addiction, and people are really listening by that time.
yeah,
It's almost like what you were saying about ethos, logos, pathos. It's like you started out with the pathos just making everybody laugh at like I said, wiener jokes.
yeah.
And then for the people that really count, you got a couple of appeals to logos, like through the rest of the album. And it's like a true mastery of like rhetorical style in a way, while also entertaining people for an
Right.
hour. And then the influence on all the other comedians that opened themselves up over the years and talked about things like this. Like I said, I saw Dave Chappelle live talking about all the flack he got for, the fact when he walked away from comedy and that whole
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
And then for some of his like comments about trans people and stuff like that. I think he kind of fell on his face when he was talking about that stuff. I think he shouldn't have brought it up. Wasn't that funny but the opening up to the audience and talking about his personal life and as part of comedy, I think comes from this. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something before this, but I think it comes from this.
Yeah.
So I think I got to toast this because of that. I think this is the first one of those.
Great.
I think I've really loved some comedy that's like, have you ever seen Tig Notaro?
No.
She's really, really funny. Like just a great, again, like a really great comedic voice. But one of her most famous things is she had just found out the day before she went on stage that she had cancer, and she started doing her bit, but then she just kind of started talking about that, and it's just this phenomenal appearance. Like I've listened to it multiple times. It's just like it's born from this. Like getting up on stage as a comedian and then talking about having found out you had cancer that day is like him talking about the Freebase episode.
Yeah.
And it's some of the best comedy. It's really it works on just a higher level. I like a lot of those kind of things. Louis C.K. talking about all the trouble he got into and doing that bit. It's really open and
Yeah.
funny, and it's a different genre almost than stand-up comedy. It's almost like I don't know what it is, but it's something completely different. So I think I got to toast it because of that.
Fantastic. I'm so glad to hear
Bot-
that.
Bottoms up with our cruel comparison of Michael Jackson and Richard Pryor.
Well, it wasn't a flaming drink, okay? It could have been worse.
It could have been worse, and I considered calling the episode "Stop, Drop, and Roll" or something like that.
Oh,
but
no.
I
Yeah,
don't.
that's
Yeah.
terrible. I'm so glad to hear that, and can't wait till the next one.
So for Toasting the Classics, this is Dave McArthur.
And this is Dr. Professor Clint Lanier.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. This was a lot of fun. See you next time.
Bye.
That's it for episode 114 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, stay tuned to find out what we'll be mixing up and turning into gold for our discussion of Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. If you'd like to get in touch, email us at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, or let us know why you prefer making your own freebase to just buying crack on the street. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on X at @attractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.